Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well, and in this video I'll be covering the Vagabond series as a whole. I'll start with chapter 1 and build it up from that point on till the latest chapter as this series is still ongoing. I feel that after creating so much Berserk content, I think this is the direction that I need to take in order for this channel to get more refined, so to speak. Moreover, it will also clear my head from Berserk and hopefully will give me the right headscape to cover chapter 376, if it ever comes out. I'll try to cover as much as I can in the series, and while I don't necessarily know the many trivia related to it, I'm hoping that I'll be enlightened by the users in the comments section. Hopefully by the end of it all, I'll be able to give you my analysis in a much more refined manner. So without further ado, my introductions are pretty long-winded these days, but here it is. Vagabond Chapter 1. The Battle of Sekigahara. That is the setting in which the first chapter takes place, and we see a man take a breath amidst a battlefield which is littered with several corpses. They are all warriors who fought for some side in feudal Japan, and there are spears, arrows, and swords scattered all around. So the man takes a gulp and the narrator begins. The Battle of Sekigahara has ended. The same man who took a gulp opens his eyes, and from the corner of them see a couple of soldiers approaching towards him from the distance. I don't know if this is the original translation, but the first few pages of each volume in this series are colored, and I particularly like the color scheme of the panels, contrasting blue and red. Moreover, the art is amazing as well, which is a given because the artist of this series is Slam Dunk's own Takehiko Inoue. The soldiers are coming in and we see the chapter title Shinmen Takezo come up. In the next panel, we see that the rain has now subsided and the same man has woken up to the bitter reality of his situation. The soldiers that came up to him riding on horses have now moved away from him, thinking that he's dead. I feel that this man is crying, but I'm not too sure of it, but that wouldn't be as far off as an analysis, because the expressions on his face certainly say that he is pissed off about something. We later find out that he's been on the losing side, so it makes sense why he would be pissed. In the next scene, we see an image of a man who's lying on his belly and saying, "Forgive me, mother. I left Sakushu to make a name for myself, but it all came to nothing. Forgive me, Otsu." Now we don't know who these characters are yet. I read this one back in 2017 or something, and while I do remember the characters, I don't know the full breadth and minute details of the manga. It's been a very long time. In front of the man lying down face first into the dirt, a spear comes in and impales the ground. Thinking that the spear belongs to a refugee hunter, the man is confused and thinks that his death is now close. Just then we see the man who threw the spear say, "A survivor." Then he says the words, "Matahachi." Right now our two main characters and polar opposites are introduced, and the man says, "Matahachi, I survived as well." Matahachi then turns around on the ground and looks up to the man and says Takezo, which finally introduces our vagabond to us. Then the both of them walk while limping through the battlefield. Both are tired as both have participated in the Battle of Sekigahara and were on the losing side. As the two sit down, we see an existential question pop up. Matahachi asks Takezo, "Is this all we amount to? We left Sakushu to make a name for ourselves, perhaps take a general, but the only thing we cut down was grass to make the roads. We were handed machetes instead of spears, and were on the losing side." Now, the thing with this is that it is very reminiscent of the people who go off to fight wars but end up either as desk jockeys or are limited to menial tasks in administration. They joined up for action and adventure but instead ended up doing things that didn't have any honor to them. It is a very depressing state to be in. I won't lie, I'm 28 years old right now and wanted to join up in the military, but because of this reason I have always feared to put my foot forwards. Another reason why I didn't join up was because of my IRL situation. Instead of being demoted to desk jockeys, which is a pretty chill job, Matahachi and Takezo were reduced to being laborers. Instead of fighting and doing banzai charges, they were reduced to digging up trenches and clearing away grass to make roads. It was far detached from being an honorable endeavor. And then Matahachi says that "I don't think I'm going to last much longer. If I die, I want you to take care of Otsu." Now, Otsu is a very important character in Vagabond which will eventually be introduced to in the coming chapters, but for now, it is just a name. Just then, behind Matahachi is a man who strikes him down with the fury of a sword. They are refugee hunters, and this time it is explicitly stated that they are so. Matahachi backs away, and just as the hunter is about to take the shot, Takezo comes up and confronts the hunter. A fight ensues where Matahachi has backed away and Takezo is fighting the hunter and eventually managed to beat him down. Now, this scene is special because it shows off Takezo as a wild beast, which is a recurring theme, especially during the Hozoin and Inchun arc. It showcases him as a monster who's willing to go to any lengths to win a fight. This character arc of him matters a lot here. Now, Takezo defeats the man and scares his accomplice with his eyes. Eventually, Takezo wins and we see him limping away with Matahachi. Takezo curses the samurai and then both of them declare that they both will not die. The next panel we see a shadow of a woman who has noticed the two limping men. Matahachi, after stating that he will not die, falls down from fatigue, and Takezo falls a few steps ahead of him while looking for a village where they can rest, but instead see corpses just lying around. Eventually, the woman in the shadow approaches Takezo and stands above him. Takezo thinks that it's another bandit, but the reader knows that it is a woman who has approached him. This concludes chapter 1. Now, the only thing I want to unpack here before I end this video is the fact that when Matahachi and Takezo say that they won't die, they're actually right, but the way that they live their lives are very different. Matahachi dies while living and Takezo lives while brushing away death. It is something that is a recurring theme in Vagabond, and something that we will discuss further in the coming videos. It is also the main philosophy of life that is discussed in Vagabond. Overall, I feel that the last time that I read this, I was very young and inexperienced and didn't know much about life in general. Moreover, with the edits, the excitement of the series is not emphasized as much as it's supposed to. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but has the action part missing in them. Most of the edits are just, you have no enemies kind of edits, which are good, but they don't capture the series as much as they're supposed to. So anyways, thanks for watching and stay tuned for part 2. Alright, so chapter 2 of the Vagabond manga. Let's get right down into it without wasting any time. This chapter is important because A, it's chapter number 2, and B, because it adds depth to the previously introduced characters and goes on to further introduce new characters that have a pretty heavy impact on the series down the road. Chapter 2 starts with Takezo and Matahachi waking up in a house. They don't know where they are and it is not clearly stated in the manga, but they wake up nonetheless. Matahachi asks Takezo where they are. Takezo does not reply, but instead says that what matters is that we're alive. And in the next panel we are introduced to a negative design artwork of Takezo, alongside the chapter title named Akemi. It is the dark of night and we see a woman dressing herself up and looking very good. Once she is ready, she approaches Takezo and the woman is clearly trying to lead our samurai boy astray. This catches the young novice by surprise, who shrugs off the woman, adding to her dismay. As he gains some consciousness, he sees that Matahachi is alive and kicking and having a cup of sake in the other room. It's clear that this is the woman's home. Almost instantly, Takezo asks Matahachi to leave, to which Matahachi objects. He says that they have to thank the woman for her hospitality and whatnot. The woman, whose name is Oko, starts to goad Takezo to stay inside as well. The woman continues to insist and even goes so far as to say that one of them should marry Akemi, her daughter, and stay indefinitely. Now, Akemi is the girl who saved the duo from being unalived in the battlefield in chapter 1. When the discussion of marriage is brought up, Matahachi is visibly looking interested at the prospect. He blushes but is hesitant for some reason. We later find out what that reason is. The next panel is shot in a forest and Takezo is seen picking mushrooms alongside Akemi, and Akemi tells him that the mushrooms he's picked up are poisonous and then asks him whether he's trying to do something that is bad to Akemi and the gang. Afterwards, Akemi says something that is quite interesting. She asks Takezo, "Why don't you ask me any questions?" Takezo is confused at this and does not know what to ask. We later find out that our boy Matahachi has been asking Akemi questions non-stop. He asked the women about their age, where Akemi's father was, and so on. The endless barrage continued. Takezo the Stoic has no need to ask such trivial questions because that is not where his mind lies. It's clearly shown that his focus is entirely on the sword. Eventually the conversation goes down to the ages of the two characters. Takezo mentions that he's 17 while Akemi says that she's 15. Then there is a joke about Takezo looking like he's 30. The next question is quite important as Takezo asks Akemi what she was doing at the battlefield at night. Then we see a quick back and forth of panels switching from Matahachi to Takezo. The question posed by Takezo is quite logical as there is no basis for a young girl to be present at a battlefield that is riddled with the remains of war. Switching over to the other side, Matahachi is in Oko's house and accidentally pulls up a compartment that reveals plenty of swords and military equipment. He marvels at the swords and their number. Just then, Oko arrives and catches him snooping around in her special compartment. The shot then goes to Akemi, who says that she and her mother are thieves who steal military equipment from battlefields battlefields and sell them. Oko says the same thing in her shot, but in a very different manner. It's a manner which catches Matahachi off guard and confuses the young man. Now the way that the both of them respond to Oko's advances is very important since it sets the tune for the rest of the series. Takezo didn't care one bit about the more humanist, side of things, while Matahachi is indulgent in such desires. The reason being that both of their upbringing was very different, but more on that in the coming videos. After telling Takezo all that, Akemi then asks him if he has any further questions, to which Takezo says, "Who's that?" referring to a man in the distance. The artwork and the appearance of the man clearly show that he means business and is an enemy. Akemi in anger throws a rock at the man, which he avoids and then refers to her by her name, indicating that this man knows who she is. As she is in the arms of Takezo, she is seen shuddering at this man's presence, and finally she responds to Takezo's question by saying that this man is Tsujikaze Tenma, the man who killed her father. I've already analyzed some personality aspects of both Matahachi and Takezo as I went along with the description of the chapter, but I feel that it is equally important to discuss Oko and Akemi. Now, these women play a variety of great roles in the series. I don't want to spoil you, but in both the book and the manga, they are present in almost every volume. In the next couple of volumes, Oko in particular is the one who acts as a catalyst to Matahachi's destruction. I say catalyst because Matahachi was by his very nature going towards a life of ruin in the series. There were just some characters who pushed things along. As far as Tsujikaze Tenma is concerned, he has an important role in Takezo's life as well, which we'll see in the coming chapters. So that is all there is for chapter 2, and we move on to chapter 3. Alright, so chapter 3 of the Vagabond series follows along from the previous chapter where we saw the appearance of Tsujikaze Tenma, Oko, and Akemi. All these new characters were introduced and chapter 3 builds upon them, so let's get right down into it. So Tsujikaze Tenma, the moment he arrives in front of Akemi and Takezo, he states that Akemi went to Sekigahara again, which is the battlefield where she went to collect weapons and where she found both our protagonists. He says that the Tsujikaze gang won't put up with such things and tell her to warn Oko about what he said. Now, collecting the swords was a sort of a ploy to get these people off of her back or something close to that. Then we see an amazing shot of Takezo, which also introduces chapter number 3. So inside of Oko's house, there are arrangements being made in preparation of Tenma's raid, who has by this point left the gang alone. They're busy managing and hiding the swords that the woman duo managed to collect in the battlefield. Matahachi is marveling at all of the stolen items. He says that, what a collection. After the job is finished, Oko heaves a sigh and says that that should be enough to fool Tenma. Then there is this one sword that remains and Takezo picks it up. It is a wooden sword. Takezo takes the sword in his hand, tests its grip and feel, and then makes a slashing motion. The intensity of that slash makes Matahachi flinch, after which he tells Takezo to take it easy, clearly perplexed by our samurai boy's wild side. Upon seeing this, Oko asks Takezo whether or not he wants to have the sword, to which Takezo replies in the affirmative. Because of the whole intensity of his slash accompanied by the machismo of Takezo, Oko is visibly impressed and compliments him by saying that even just an oak sword makes you look more manly, which is clearly a ploy by Oko, an attempt to make the duo stay with them. Upon noticing this, Matahachi clearly understands the game that Oko is trying to play. Meanwhile, our vagabond doesn't care about these externalities and is more interested in the sword. Takezo then confirms whether or not he can have the sword, and Oko gives a kind of sly smirk, which also comes under the notice of Akemi. Now, everyone is noticing this exchange of emotions except our boy Takezo. Matahachi, in seeing this exchange happen, says that he wants something as well, as if he is a little kid out on a carnival with his parents. After this exchange, we are taken to a panel where the four people are busy merrymaking and drinking sake while having a conversation. Matahachi at this point asks Takezo whether or not he plans to leave the place. In actuality, what he's doing is trying to check whether Takezo is getting enamored by Oko. There is a clear case of jealousy going on in the room, as Oko is more inclined towards Takezo rather than Matahachi. This is indicated clearly when Oko is seen sitting a little too close for comfort with Takezo. Akemi and Matahachi are both perplexed at this. Matahachi then makes a move and tells the group that he has a fiancée back home and that he will return home to Miyamoto village. This is not stated as a fact, but rather this statement is used as a tool to get a reaction out of Oko. Meanwhile, our boy Takezo is getting inebriated by the second. Upon hearing that Matahachi is engaged, Oko becomes passive-aggressive. She says that I won't stop you unless you leave by your own self. Now, Oko has the upper hand as the words she says clearly have an effect on Matahachi, who thought that she should be head over heels upon hearing this and continue to pester the duo, Matahachi in particular, to stay and be alongside them. By now, our boy Takezo has passed out. Another power play of sorts plays out where Matahachi laughs at Takezo for not being able to keep it together. However, that backfires as well when Oko looks at Takezo's sleepy state in what I assume to be a caring manner. This show of affection makes Matahachi scowl and removes any chances of him increasing his points in Oko's eyes. After this whole charade, a dream sequence takes place where Takezo's father is seen alongside Takezo's younger self. He asks him where his mother has gone, to which his father replies that his mother is now gone out of their lives. Now, the character design of his father is quite interesting in that he is depicted as a very tough and resilient man. Moreover, his clothing makes him off to be quite a dignified man of his time, which clearly shows that he is a samurai. We will find out more about his father and his many feats in the coming chapters. His father then builds up on his previous statement by saying that you are to no longer think of your mother. The young Takezo looks at him angrily, to which his father says that you're a weakling and you don't give me those beast-like eyes. He clearly is a man who wants obedience, giving off the whole appearance of being the overbearing father in Takezo's life. In this singular panel alone, we get to see Takezo's story unfold, and we see why he is such a tough man at the age of 17, while Matahachi, being the same age, is quite mellow compared to Takezo. Now, an important detail that I missed in the previous discussion is the word his father says. He calls his son a beast, which is an important theme of Vagabond till a certain point in the story. Takezo is essentially a wild animal in the coming chapters, looking to become the best of the best through sheer force. When he wakes up from his dream, Takezo opens up his eyes to find Oko present near him, waiting for him to wake up. Before, in chapter 2, she was being subtle about these kinds of matters, but this time she is clearly explicit in her approach to the whole situation. Regardless of her advances, Takezo throws her off. It's that same thing of touch me not that we see from Guts in Berserk, but that is another story that we'll get to in the coming videos. He stops the advance from happening, and as this is happening, we see a loud thump effect on the door, which indicates the arrival of Tsujikaze Tenma. This concludes chapter 3. Now, I've analyzed this chapter as I've gone along, but the most important thing to understand in this chapter is that there is a certain charisma that exudes from Takezo. Because of that, he doesn't care about any advances thrown his way. That particular disregard does go deeper because of the whole touch me not thing that I mentioned before, but that is besides the point. The whole dynamic of the group in this chapter is built down upon in the next couple of chapters, which finally culminates in the weirdest scene I've ever read in manga, and that is not hyperbole since I've seen my fair share of weird moments in reading different series. But regardless, on to chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4 of Vagabond, let's get right down into it. In the last chapter, we saw Oko making a move on Takezo. However, Takezo was able to shrug her off one more time. Before, Oko was just trying to test the waters, but in the final scene of chapter 3, Oko went the whole 9 yards. Upon being shrugged off by Takezo once again, Oko is visibly angry at the situation and says that Takezo, how dare you embarrass me like this? Takezo is confused because he is a novice and does not have experience in these kinds of matters. Matahachi, on the other hand, is somewhat experienced and particularly curious about these kinds of situations because of his engagement that was discussed in the previous chapter. As Takezo shrugs Oko off, we hear a loud thumping noise in the background. The Tsujikaze gang has made their arrival and these guys are making it known to the people inside. They are definitely after the weapons and military equipment that Oko has stashed away from Tenma, so he's brought the whole gang together in order to search the whole house and take away the loot. Now, this chapter is interesting because it shows a side of Oko that we did not see in the previous chapters. In the previous chapter, we saw her as a promiscuous and sly woman owing to the fact that she's doing her level best to make sure that Matahachi and Takezo join up with Akemi and her indefinitely, given that the scenes that have unfolded previously are quite intense. Oko is inside of the same room and the gang is just moving about the house trying to find the weapons. Oko has done a very good job of hiding them. Eventually, one of the brigands asks Oko herself where she hid the stuff. Oko is visibly distressed at the situation and is angry at Tsujikaze Tenma's arrival, and it is clearly shown that Tenma has some level of control over Oko. We later find out what that is. He asks Oko for some sake, to which Oko replies that Tenma get it himself, which shows that Oko does not consider this man in high regard, unlike Takezo and Matahachi. Because of that interaction, Tenma says that even brigands have their code and he has to search their house. Oko says that she hasn't stolen anything. Then comes in the kicker and the reason why Tenma is so insistent upon doing this kind of bullying. These are just swords, and to a brigand who resides in a war-torn area, this shouldn't have been that much of a concern. He could get them by himself. Then Tenma says, "You be mine and you won't have to live like this," indicating that his eyes are on Oko, similar to Matahachi, as we later find out. This is Tenma's base nature at play here. All he wants is a crumb. But jokes apart, Oko replies that what kind of a woman ends up with the person who took her husband away from her? Your face disgusts me. I am paraphrasing, but her words are sharp and clearly have the intended effect. The scene is very important because even though Oko is depicted as this sharp woman with a promiscuous eye and a knack of hospitality and the finer things in life, but that is her good side. When you peel back the layers, you find a woman who's lost her husband and is responsible for her daughter. The wounds that she has endured show a new layer of her personality. Now, I know that her overall role in the series is quite antagonistic, but still this chapter shows her in a much more favorable light as compared to the others. Also, the insanity of the coming chapters just knocks everything right out of the park. Another thing that makes me dislike Oko is that she sends her daughter out in the battlefield, which clearly shows that while she does keep her around, she doesn't really care much about Akemi's safety. Afterwards, Tenma shamelessly brings some sake over, drinks it, and then proceeds to enter into Oko's room. He asks his men to check the ceiling for any weapons. Before entering, he opens up another cupboard where Akemi is sitting cowering in fear and hidden from his sight. He orders his men to take her out, and things aren't looking good for Akemi nor Oko. The bandits have her both as hostages. Tenma, as he proceeds to enter into the room, doesn't see that behind the walls, Takezo and Matahachi are standing ready with their swords. It is shown to be the case, but Tenma is an experienced dirtbag and getting angry proceeds to punch the wall and attack the two men. A fight ensues where our boy Matahachi is getting in on the action and going to save Akemi, while Takezo is in a brawl with Tenma. Now this Tenma fellow, the moment he gets his hands on the young man, proceeds to try and beat him, but instead gets his hand chewed up by the wild beast. The shock on his face is surprising. Takezo then spits the remains back at him, and then a real fight ensues where Tenma is more wary of the man who's fighting against him. This ends the chapter. The only thing I want to reiterate here is that Oko is a character who has her moments, like literally, and this particular scene does not make me like her, even though it is pretty noble for her to say those things to Tenma. But there are layers to her character, which is why, even though she is an antagonist, she is still an interesting character. So on to chapter 5. Alright, so chapter 5 of the manga starts off from where we left, and it shows a beaten down Tenma after his altercation with Takezo. The latter clearly energized by the fact that the fight took place. It is clearly stated here when he says that, "I'm glad I left Miyamoto. You might be a brigand, but you're still a general, and I'll have your head." This scene and this chapter are both interesting because it highlights the insanity that Vagabond is famous for. It shows that Takezo has a love for fighting the good fight, which stems from his tough childhood and his father's actions. Because of this, he believes that being weak is not the way of the world and that one must be strong in order to survive, which is true to a certain extent. He came to Sekigahara to fight and test his strength, and he would do that regardless of who is up against him. Another thing that makes this scene interesting is the smirk and subsequent actions of Matahachi. Now here we see him take his sword out and attack the other members of the gang to save Akemi from danger. He manages to inflict a lot of damage in this scene, which shows that Matahachi has the courage to fight as well. One of the most surprising things that happen after this scene is that Tenma, upon sensing serious danger from Takezo, runs away instead of fighting head on, which is something that echoes 20 or so chapters down the road in Takezo's own life. But more on that in the coming videos. This escape showcases the kind of man Tenma is, and also the kind of man that Takezo is. When Tenma runs away, Takezo runs after him like a predator going after his prey. The intensity in the chase is emphasized when Takezo says that how can you run and still call yourself a leader? Then we see a full spread of him chasing after Tenma, which culminates in a harrowing scene where Tenma is defeated by Takezo in a fell swoop. After finishing the job, he's looking at Tenma and gives a slight smirk. He is huffing, but the animal has managed to get the victory in this battle. Then the panel shifts to Matahachi, who follows after him and draws up his sword in accomplishment. He says that freebooters are weaklings. How was the boss? Takezo replies, nothing special. Then there is a statement where Matahachi proclaims that Honiden Matahachi and Shinmen Takezo from the village of Miyamoto in Sakushu will take anyone on. Now they're just relishing and having a good time after achieving their first victory. Oko notices that and then says that we are leaving, all of a sudden, which catches the duo off guard. Then she builds up on her statement by saying that we'll have to leave if we want to avoid getting defeated. The chapter ends with Oko saying the words Tsujikaze Kohei. Now there are two things that I want to discuss in this chapter. The first is that though the demise of Matahachi is taking place and is ever present, it is clearly shown that when push comes to shove, Matahachi can fight. The fact that he took down 2 members of the gang as a novice, and mind you, it is a gang which is operating in the battlefields of Sekigahara, is impressive. I feel that in this scene, Takezo is kind of a foil to Matahachi, and as the former goes into action, then so does the latter. Right now we see his energy and youthful ability in full display, but that does not disregard the fact that Matahachi is the kind of man who is a slave to his own self. The second thing that I want to discuss here is about the man named Tsujikaze Kohei. Of course, by this point you know that Tenma and Kohei are related to one another in some way, and in the next volume or so we'll see a fight that truly gave Takezo a tough time and improved his growth as a character. So on to chapter 6. In discussing Vagabond in such minute detail, I feel that I have developed a lot of appreciation of the manga as a whole, because in reading the series from panel to panel, you tend to see details that you otherwise would not have been able to see if you read it in a quick run, trying to go through the story as quickly as possible. A good example of this is Matahachi's subtle jealousy at Takezo when Oko is trying to flirt with the latter. I feel as though it sheds a lot more light to the characters and is a good method of discussion overall. Moreover, it makes my narrative a whole lot refined, so that's that as well. So in chapter 5, we read the mention of a character named Tsujikaze Kohei by a scared Oko. In this one, we see the aftermath of the Tsujikaze Tenma fight and the brigands' retreat. Oko, Takezo, and the group are thus left to their lonesome. It's the dark of night, and in the moonlight we see that Matahachi has still not gone to sleep. He cannot sleep for 2 reasons. The first reason is that he's finally experienced the adrenaline rush of a fight in the previous chapter. Being a young man who came all the way to Sekigahara, that is a big achievement and one that gives a massive boost to his masculinity. Our young novice is finally a man. In addition to this elation, he's thinking about Kohei and believes that he can take him on, considering that he defeated 4 men a couple of hours back. Now the second reason. Because of this sudden surge in adrenaline, our boy Matahachi thinks of Oko and how he wants to spend some time with her as kind of a reward for becoming a warrior. He is visibly perturbed by his thoughts but proceeds to go to her room anyways. Because it's very late, there is darkness in the room and Oko can't see who's entered. She asks the person, "Which one are you, Takezo or Matahachi?" Upon hearing this, Matahachi is confused about Oko's preference, and after thinking a lot, he eventually does the biggest duty that a man can do and calls himself Takezo, and then, proceeds to the task at hand. However, as the event of human importance unfolds, Oko says the darndest of things. "I thought you had a fiancé," throwing Matahachi completely off guard, and finally, after being banished by Takezo, she's finally managed to trap at least one of the 2 men. I specifically love this face that Matahachi makes because it's essentially saying that play stupid games with stupid prizes. Then the morning comes and Matahachi is visibly depressed. With him are Takezo and Akemi, with Takezo doing some cleaning of himself because of the battle that took place the previous night. Then Matahachi takes a bow and dips his head in the river and then states, "Forgive me, Otsu," referring to her fiancé. Now the thing with this is that this guy should have had an understanding of the thing he was attempting to do the previous night. If you're engaged to someone, you're supposed to stay loyal to them. I say this from a modern perspective, but it holds true in the context of the story as well. You have to have some level of morality. This lack of morality and actions that he did with Oko really emphasizes the character of Matahachi. He is without a doubt a dirtbag. He takes his head out of the water and then says that he's going back to Miyamoto, and then follows along with it by saying that he misses Otsu. Him remembering Otsu at this point after what he's done, it just kind of muddies all of the achievements that he gained in the previous chapter. Takezo, in response to this, says that he will not go back to Miyamoto village and that Matahachi should go home. When Takezo says that, Matahachi tilts his head in a way that indicates both surprise and concern. He's concerned for his friend, and the other thing that he's concerned with is whether or not Takezo wants to stay with Akemi and Oko. In the next panel, he is seen confirming that very fact by saying that, "Don't tell me you're actually planning on staying with Oko and Akemi." In response to this inquiry, our boy Takezo says that he's not going to stay with them either. He says that he left home knowing that he'd never go back. Eventually, he picks up a wooden stick from the floor and, pointing it towards Matahachi, says the line, "I'm a vagabond." He said the line, fellas. The chapter then ends by him saying that they're already here, referring to the gang that's about to arrive for round 2. This ends chapter 6. Now, I've analyzed Matahachi significantly in this chapter, but what I didn't mention was Otsu, and the fact that in doing the stuff he did, Matahachi went for instant gratification instead of thinking about his fiancée and the bond that he had formed with her. In the coming videos, we'll see the difference between Oko and Otsu and further rightfully badmouth our boy Matahachi for his crimes. So on to chapter 7. Alright, so chapter 7 of the Vagabond manga, let's get right down into it. Before I begin, I just want to say that though this chapter does not end the overall volume nor the Takezo arc, but what it does end is this whole cabin in the woods post Sekigahara storyline and puts the character arcs of Matahachi, Oko, and Akemi on hold. But the way that it ends the arc is intense in that not only does it showcase the rawness of Vagabond, but it also showcases the philosophical side of Vagabond to a certain degree. It does the former with the jaw-dropping fights that Takezo takes part in, and it does the latter when it pins the final nail in the coffin for Matahachi, and as you go along the chapters, you'll see the culmination of the demise and destruction of Matahachi that has been taking place since chapter 2. I've been building up to it, to be honest, and I've teased you guys a bit about how harrowingly this whole storyline ends. It is one of the worst scenes that I've read in manga. So the chapter begins, and building up on the previous chapter, we see that the Tsujikaze gang is here for revenge and is looking for an opportunity to get with Oko because, well, they are degenerates, and while you might hate them, it is the world of Vagabond. So as they're hearing the voices getting louder, Takezo in particular is angsty about fighting the returning brigands once they come to Oko's house and start doing the things they want. They're back for revenge, and Takezo won't let that opportunity slip. It showcases his thirst for fighting, given that in the chapters before he literally contented himself with fighting Tenma by saying that you might be a brigand but you're still a general. This makes me come to the conclusion that in the previous chapters, Takezo went all out against Tenma not because of any concern for Oko, he was planning to leave the moment he woke up, but rather fighting the good fight. While it is an opinion, it is further solidified further down the road in an insane backstory, and I know I'm spoiling here, that chronicles what happened before Takezo ended up lying on his back on the battlefield in chapter 1. That whole scenario clearly shows that Takezo is not the hero in the truest sense of the word. But regardless of that, let's move on. Takezo, when he hears the sounds getting louder, he just goes up and runs towards Oko's house to fight the brigands, while Matahachi isn't as on board with the whole situation, as it is clear in this full spread of chapter 7. Matahachi is clearly in two minds about this whole situation, and then we see a bit of Akemi and her thoughts. Now, this girl Akemi is very special because she isn't like Oko. She is more sensitive to her surroundings compared to her and knows that she, at the age of 14, is living an extremely cruel life. She, in a very simplistic way, thinks about Takezo's words and says to herself that, "Takezo, I want to go with you." After Akemi's thought process is finished, we see a panel in which Takezo is continuing his run, and he is, in the simplest of terms, bolting towards Oko's house, while Matahachi is being lazy and is barely trying to keep up with Takezo. The thing with Takezo is that he doesn't double think his thoughts, he just goes after the brigands like it's nothing. Meanwhile, Matahachi is very apprehensive about the whole scenario. Moreover, he has clearly lost all of his confidence right now because all his fighting prowess and masculinity was turned to garbage the previous night when Oko caught his sus behavior. His self-esteem is really low right now, which is emphasized on when he says that Takezo, "Don't leave me behind, don't leave me alone." Again, it's like that same thing I said in chapter 5. It almost feels as though Takezo is the foil to Matahachi in that the latter is inspired by Takezo to fight. Seeing one spirit ignites the spirit in the other, but not in this case. So anyways, they move on, and Matahachi, upon seeing the many horses, is confused and scared of the onslaught that is about to happen. The brigands are just too many and there's no particular element of surprise. While he is thinking of what to do, he sees Takezo going in headfirst and all guns blazing. He then says, "Are you crazy? You want to die?" After that, Matahachi thinks about the fact that he doesn't have his sword, and at this point he is very confused as to what he wants to do. And he's just waiting outside behind a tree and he's just biding his time in doublethink. This makes me think that Takezo isn't like your average realistic character, and Matahachi at this point in time is quite realistic. Of course, Takezo is the MC and this is an action-packed manga, so he's bound to be like that. But still, him going in headfirst just makes him out to be unrealistic overall. I think that this shows a very humanistic side to Matahachi, because many of us in the face of such danger would be perturbed and think twice about getting into the fight. Of course, there are exceptions to that, and there are people like Takezo who go in headfirst into the fight. But while Matahachi is realistic, what I hate about him is the fact that he is a total dirtbag and he would do anything for a crumb. In the coming volumes, we realize how big of a dirtbag this guy really is. However, this chapter is him peaking his depravity, so let's move on to Takezo, who is now surrounded on all sides by nearly 10 brigands, each a very strong individual. They are all marveling at the fact that this 17-year-old was able to get the upper hand and defeat a guy like Tenma. Now, Tenma is elaborated on at length in the coming volumes, where we see a different side to him. As for now, Tenma is a dirtbag, so let's just keep it at that. Another thing that you'll notice about these brigands is that these are just minor soldiers who are out for revenge and for other things, and the presence of Tsujikaze Kohei is non-existent. Now, where is Tsujikaze Kohei? He will be introduced in the next volume of this manga and then elaborated on later down the line. But for now, he's not present, so let's just keep it at that. While the brigands have Takezo surrounded, Matahachi is thinking back at the previous day and his accomplishments. After doing a mental jerk-off session, he finally gets the courage to go and fight on the count of 3. Just as he's ready to go, he is interrupted by Oko, who hid herself in the woods before the brigands came in running. She tells Matahachi that she had a weird feeling, so she escaped. In any case, Matahachi says that he's glad that Oko is safe, and the moment he lays his hands on Oko's shoulders, Matahachi realizes that she's shivering from fear. She specifically says that she knew she was safe from Tenma because he had feelings for her. And this is seemingly Oko at her most vulnerable. The next thing that happens is that weird scene that I've been building up to. While Takezo is fighting for his life against 10 men, Matahachi is busy doing the deed of human importance with Oko outside in the forest. While those two are going at it like rabbits, a couple of feet away, Takezo is face to face with certain death. I need you to just imagine the thought process of this man, Matahachi. He cannot live by his own words. When he says that he doesn't want to fall behind Takezo in his mind, his practical actions literally show him doing the exact opposite. Instead of fighting for his good friend and becoming one with the way, he is essentially having a blast with Oko. At this point, Takezo is fighting with the brigands and he loudly asks where Matahachi and Oko are and whether they are alright. He's fighting in this moment for both the thrill of the battle, but still has concern for the people around him. As Takezo is thinking of Matahachi during a battle, our boy Matahachi doesn't care one bit for our boy. It is disappointing on a lot of levels. Sorry to be a broken record, by the way. As the battle is finished, Takezo comes out of Oko's house completely exhausted. He's defeated all those who came in front of him. When he comes out and walks a few steps away from the house, Takezo finds a comb and a piece of clothing that I can assume looks like an obi, which we know belongs to Oko. He just looks at it and says the words Matahachi, and then the chapter ends. This is the reason why this is such an important chapter, and it's the reason why I've been building up to it. Matahachi is a slave to his own self. Instead of going to fight, he went and got himself trapped by Oko. Now there is one particular scene that I missed that I want to discuss right now. As Oko and Matahachi are doing the thing, or beginning to do it, Matahachi says that, hey, what about Takezo? Now this scene is particularly interesting because it muddies both Matahachi and Oko's character, the latter of whom got what she had been wanting to get from the start, a male companion by her and Akemi's side. At that point, Oko wasn't thinking about the well-being of Takezo at all. With her demeanor, she was able to make Matahachi forget about Takezo altogether, which is clearly weakness from Matahachi's side. It's like a betrayal of the highest order because Takezo was always there for Matahachi, but where was Matahachi when Takezo needed him? He was busy enjoying himself. The chapter thus ends very abruptly with Takezo looking cool and sad at the same time, thinking about his dumbass of a friend. To a certain degree, it's a clear indication that Matahachi is alive but has chosen another path from Takezo. In the next chapter, we find out what happened to our dirtbag who chose hoes before bros. So on to chapter 8. Alright, so chapter 8 of the Vagabond manga, let's get right down into it. In the previous chapters, we saw Takezo declare that he will not go back to Miyamoto village and instead spend his life as a vagabond, learning the ways of the sword. However, because of the abrupt nature of Matahachi's exit with Oko and Akemi, he has to go back to Miyamoto. Why? Because he wants to make sure that both Osugi, Matahachi's mother, and Otsu, Matahachi's fiancé, know that Matahachi is still alive. The thing with this is that Matahachi didn't hold up his end of the deal. In his moment of weakness, what actually happened was that Matahachi betrayed his best friend for what I can only say was a crumb, because Oko in the coming chapters forgot about Matahachi the moment she got a wealthier client base in the form of the Yoshioka clan. But Matahachi's crimes aren't just limited to Takezo. In doing what he did, he also betrayed his fiancée by cheating on her. To satisfy his own base nature, he left the best girl in manga to her own self. Unlike Matahachi though, Takezo held up his end of the deal and went down to Miyamoto village to bid a final parting of sorts. Even though in the manga Takezo is considered as this wild animal, you have to truly understand his human side in order to completely understand his character arc. Now, I need you to imagine a scenario where Takezo didn't go back to Miyamoto village. What do you think would have happened? Takezo and Matahachi would have done something with their lives, but Osugi and Otsu would constantly be thinking about the men and what happened to them. There would be no closure for them at all. They would be in constant pain while thinking about the two. So the moment Takezo enters the village, a child sees him and goes off running to Osugi to inform her of the situation. Osugi is first doing some confused unga bunga about the Honiden family, and then the moment she hears Takezo's name, she is first seen doing a surprise unga bunga, then gets angry as hell. She experiences a lot of emotions because Takezo equals Matahachi. If Takezo has made his appearance, then Matahachi would probably tag along with him as well. So technically there is a ray of hope for Osugi. She is desperately hoping that Matahachi has returned home safely with Takezo, but we later find out that her dreams are all shattered. She asks several villagers if the rumors are true, but one man tells her it's not and that she should give up hope. Enraged, Osugi slaps the man for dashing her hopes. Soon after, two samurais enter the village inquiring about the whereabouts of the Shinmen family. Osugi, still angry, discloses that she is not part of their family. The samurais then reveal that they are tracking Takezo for killing two men and entering the province. Osugi is further dismayed to learn Takezo returned alone. Her anger and frustration boil over even more upon hearing that Takezo abandoned Matahachi. Seeking revenge, she offers to help the samurais capture Takezo. Osugi then paints him as a beast who first killed at a young age, hoping this fuels the samurai's pursuit. In the next few panels, we are in the forest and the samurais come across the body of one of their own. Nearby, we are introduced to Otsu, who is gathering berries when she suddenly comes face to face with Takezo, who emerges from the bushes. Startled, she screams loudly. The samurais hear Otsu's cry for help and deduce Takezo is close. They take off following the tracks he left, fleeing into the dense forest. Osugi's influencing hate towards Takezo appears to be aiding the samurais in closing in on their target, which then ends the chapter. That's all there is to chapter 8. Now, the character arc of Otsu plays an integral role throughout the story despite not being a follower of the way herself. On the surface, Otsu serves as this love interest of the protagonist. However, her impact extends far beyond a simple romantic subplot. Through her relationship with Musashi or Takezo and interactions with other characters, especially the Yagyu, Otsu comes to represent important symbolic themes that enhance the narrative and characterization of Vagabond. That was a mouthful. She acts as a window into Musashi's humanity and a motivator for his growth as a person. In the midst of the violence that surrounds Takezo's life, Otsu acts as a symbol of hope. As far as my analysis on Osugi is concerned, you all know what I want to say, and it's not pretty, to be honest. So on to chapter 9. Alright, so chapter 9 of the Vagabond manga, let's get right down into it. When we last saw Takezo, he had just got the jump on Otsu. The jump wasn't intended to be that he wanted it to be. What he wanted was a conversation with Otsu, but his tattered rags, the deleted individual in the forest, and everything else combined for a jump scare that really scared Otsu. As she screamed, Takezo had to run away because the soldiers were there as well as the granny. Of course, Takezo is not a dummy and he won't stand there. So in the next chapter, we see the Shippoji temple and Granny alongside Otsu is present at the temple. It is a government office and they're talking to an official named Aoki Tanzaemon. The granny is just going at it again, saying that Takezo is this and that there is no way that Tanzaemon and his soldiers will be able to capture Takezo and bring him to justice. In the next panel, we see Takezo just munching on some food he found in the forest. He's thinking about all of what he's doing and the dismal response from the villagers. The fact that he's broken the law for Matahachi and Osugi stands in stark opposition to the kind of response that he's received. So in the next panel, we see Takezo getting a jump on a villager and telling him that he should inform the granny that Matahachi is still alive. But he leaves out the part where Matahachi became a dirtbag and went with another woman. That comes later. So back at the temple, Aoki Tanzaemon is the one who embodied Matahachi's soul and is being a total dirtbag to Otsu by ogling constantly at her. This guy, I hate him a lot. A couple of panels later, we see the granny back at her home and is seen praying to God to save Matahachi and whatnot. Meanwhile, she's left Otsu at the temple where Tanzaemon is being a creep with no one to stop him from making advances at Otsu. Even the priest present there is not able to do anything and Otsu has to make do. She eventually manages to make an escape. Then the panel shifts to Takezo and his conversation with the granny, who is just angry at Takezo and is hurling whatever she can at him while Takezo is taking the hit, trying to find a way to inform her of the situation. This granny woman does this throughout the series, and in both the book and the manga there is no reprieve or redemption for this lady at all. The chapter ends when he finally declared the magic words to the granny. Now this chapter is pretty standard and it showcases the world of Vagabond as it stands because of the corruption from Aoki Tanzaemon and the situation in which Takezo finds himself in. So on to chapter 10. Alright, so chapter 10 of the Vagabond manga, let's get right down into it. This is the final chapter in volume 1 and the end of my suffering and the suffering of this channel with only 20 to 30 views a pop. In the last chapter, we saw Takezo telling the granny that Matahachi is alive and her being a total prude about it. As this was happening, our girl Otsu was in the clutches of Aoki Tanzaemon with no reprieve even of her own. Osugi loves her son as a mother should, and upon hearing the words that Matahachi is still alive, wants to double check and confirm from Takezo. Upon getting an answer in the affirmative, she gets angrier at him and curses Takezo for coming back without Matahachi. Finally, with no other option, Takezo says that Matahachi is living with another woman away from home. This piece of news in the previous chapter was broken to Otsu as well through a letter that was written to her by Oko. We later find out that it was written by Matahachi, but the words were of Oko. Upon hearing this, Otsu gets a mental breakdown, which is as heartbreaking as it can get. A couple of panels afterwards, we see that the granny has now mellowed down, but that is a ploy to get Takezo into a level of comfort. Once he has that comfort, she sends in the officials to capture the man. Yet he gets out of the trap ready for a fight, and in the next chapter, we see that fight unfold. The chapter ends with Otsu continuing that mental breakdown. Now there's nothing much to expand here except Otsu's plight, which is very disheartening, but in the next video I'll make a compilation of all of these videos for your viewing pleasure and be prepared for Berserk in the coming months. That's about it, and thank you so much for watching.